Welcome to Peace Now. My name is Trudy Quaife. I'm a member of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace. We're a local organization of friends and neighbors, and we've been advocating for peace, justice, and a healthy planet for over a decade. I'm your host today, and I'm joined by Fred Pfeiffer.
Hi, Trudy. Thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Let me give you a little background about Fred. He's lived in the Capital Region for over 40 years. He's a machinist by trade. He's a union activist. He was an elected representative of union members. Half his life he worked in area factories, and the other half on behalf of union members. He's currently retired from paid wage, but he's working on sustainable gardening, and he also works at the Honest Weight Co-op. He's an activist on many levels, and he's one of the founding members of the Solidarity Committee. And he's currently working to help publish the Solidarity Notes, which is a monthly publication of the Solidarity Committee. Can you tell us a little bit about your first experiences with activism, Fred?
I think the first experience I can recall, I grew up in a small town in Monroe and then in Goshen, New York. And I think my first experience was canvassing for UNICEF when there was a famine in Africa in a region called Biafra. And I remember I wrote a poem about it. Dear Biafran, starving child, your tiny bones show through the tight skin that is most of you. And I just thought that it was so ridiculous that people would be starving when I had plenty of, well, not plenty of food. We weren't a wealthy family. We were very working class, but we had enough food to eat and get by, you know. And so that was probably the first activist venture. And I think that shows how important groups like the United Nations and UNICEF are, because they not only help people who are in dire need, but they also let people know in other parts of the developed world where we don't have as many of these problems, that there is a great need out there that somehow needs to be, filled.
So that was when you were a child?
Yeah, I was probably in junior high then. Had a paper route, pretty typical childhood. Ended up moving to Goshen, went to high school in Goshen, New York, and lettered in a couple sports, and got involved around the civil rights era with having a public forum with the NAACP on what was going on, because that was the time that Martin Luther King was murdered, and prior to that there was a lot of demonstrations, and Malcolm X was just starting to speak out. So there was a lot of controversy. And we had a small African-American population in Goshen because of the history of the track there, and the track workers who came up, many of them were African-American. And prior to that, they worked in agriculture in the Warwick area where they have black loan. Yeah, migrant seasonal workers. Now there's mostly Latino workers working there now. So that was important that I did that, and also got involved in a Democratic elective race and ran a campaign office for a Democrat, Burkhart against Representative Gilman. The Republican won, served many years in that position, but it was a good chance for me to see what a liberal politician how he could raise issues in a conservative area and in a campaign. And I remember we did all our campaign literature in green and black, because that's the color of money. So you can see this poster here is green and black, so that carried through.
Now, so what other issues were you involved with? Were you part of the anti-war movement? And
well, yeah, I struggled with what to do as a teenager. I had a teacher who was really wonderful, two social studies teacher, Mr. Campbell and Mr. Tufektis, who one played pro-war, one played Dove, and they would do these debates proactively in our class. And I remember at one point I really felt I should enlist and go to Vietnam to find out, really what was going down there firsthand. And then my parents convinced me probably to go to college, and I did get a scholarship, so I went to the University of Bridgeport. And it was there that I really studied, even though I ended up only staying for a year, but I really started studying and reading books that I had a lot of potential. I read Malcolm X. I read a lot about Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, and I came to the conclusion that this was an unjust war in Vietnam, and it was tragic that so many people like me were having to make a decision to go over or not, and I ultimately decided that I shouldn't stay in college just to keep a 2S deferment. So I basically did what I needed to do and played soccer there for a year and studied for a year, and then took a break from college activity. But I remember one specific time we were in my dorm, and the upperclassmen and I got into a debate, and I ended up being the only person who was debating that this war was unjust. This was in 1968, 69. And I was surrounded by people who were very fervently believing we should support the war. There was about 30 people against me. And being young and a freshman, I really thought I was probably crazy because public opinion was so much against me.
Yeah.
But then I found more like-minded people and realized that it was a legitimate position to have. So I started getting involved in the anti-war demonstrations because we felt that the violence was just too much, and it was unnecessary, and people, once again, were suffering overseas.
So then you became a machinist, and you got involved with union organizing at that point?
After being involved in the anti-war movement for several years, I went to California and was involved in the political scene there. Then I came back and actually settled in Glens Falls for a couple of years, and then moved down to Albany. And I think the 60s were interesting. They were fun. They were scary. I really saw that there was this the government was putting agents out there and spying on people who were against the war, and it was very uncomfortable, and there was a lot of paranoia connected with that. So I also thought that although the youth movement was very innocent and ethical, that it was also a little irresponsible, and I felt I didn't want to be a fringe person. So the person I was with at the time moved back and went to nursing school, and I went to work in the factories, and that was really a good move because I got discipline, and I really got to talk to and understand regular people, and I sort of ridded myself of, I think, an intellectual elitism that can come when you're in the college-bound track. I think it's really important to contain your hubris. It's very easy to feel like you're somehow better than people, and I learned so much from the people I worked with in the factories over the years, and really cherish. In fact, I just visited a friend of mine who was a machinist that I worked with in a couple factories, who's getting up there in age. So as a machinist, though, what I liked about that is that it was a higher paying job in a factory, and also you controlled your own work because you would lay out the job and take it through from process A, B, C, and D for the final work piece. So that gave me much more control, because one of the things I found in factory work was that so much of it was geared to production, and the more they could create an environment that was moment-to-moment production, the less control you had over your 8 hours while you were in the factory, and that was a bit alienating.
Okay, well, you worked for years as a labor organizer. What benefit do you see in labor organizing and in labor unions?
Well, first, when I was on the shop floor in a union facility, one of the things that I could see immediately was if we were working with a new chemical, a new coolant to help with cutting metal, we could ask to go see a material safety data sheet, an MSDS sheet, and because it was a union shop, you weren't looked upon as a pariah. I also worked in some non-union shops, and if you ask any question about anything, you were looked at as a troublemaker. So you had some freedom of movement and protection against unsafe conditions,
That's a good point.
and also camaraderie with other workers who were also exposed to the solvents. And believe me, we were willing to work in just about any conditions because we always knew we needed to create value, to keep our jobs and to be profitable. But there was no excuse to unnecessarily expose working people to job hazards.
Yeah.
So that was very important. And then I get to know the steward structure, and I found out about what shop stewards were supposed to do on the job. And then I would go to union meetings, and there would be discussions at the union meetings. And what I began to realize was this was actually a democratic experience for people, which forced them to work together outside of the authority figure who was the employer. And I realized that in non-union shops, so much of work was ruled by fear of losing your job, fear of being an economic failure. But in a union shop, even though you still had to worry a little bit, the fear level was much lower, and you could actually talk about significant ideas and things that might be disturbing to management because they were progressive and most of the managers were pretty conservative.
Okay. Well, let's fast forward here to more recent history. You were part of the Occupy Albany movement. Could you talk a little about why you chose to get involved in that, and what you think the effects were?
Well, for many years, after I had the shop floor experience, I had the opportunity to be an elected official in a union and on executive boards. And then also I finally worked as a staff person for various unions. And I realized that there wasn't, in the 80s and the 90s, there was not an external movement that was really present, like there had been in the 60s and the 70s with the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the safe energy movement. Things sort of toned down. And I thought a lot of what we were doing in the unions was sort of keeping that spark of democracy and progressivism alive, even though we had our own internal struggles in the unions, because the unions were many times more conservative than I liked. The Occupy moment, I think, captured the fact that we were not really educating people as to the economics of our society and the injustices that resulted from that, and fighting to have rights on the job and the ability to negotiate and make sure that you as workers were put in the budget sort of held me through that period of time. And then when I saw that people were finally realizing, because of 2008 crash and the lack of jobs for people who had been put on the college career ladder, that people were realizing that there was this huge problem. There was a problem in terms of people having job opportunities after they spent a lot of years in studying for their occupation or their vocation or their passion. And they also realized that one of the reasons for that was that the money was being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands rather than distributed throughout the society into jobs and into jobs that had decent standards and perhaps were unionized so that workers could actually have a voice and earn a good living and benefits on the job. So it was really refreshing to see a lot of young people from all different parts of life in the United States coming together. So I did go down to New York City to the Occupy Square and Freedom Square and participated here. I was not a leader. I was one of many that came and did whatever I could. At that time I was working for CSEA, so on my lunch hour, I was at the main headquarters office on Washington Avenue, so on my lunch hour I'd walk down and get to know people and and on the weekends, I remember being there with you a couple times, talk to people who were coming into the circle and having these really good conversations and trying to do some understanding and learning myself, as well as educating people that may not have been plugged in to the movement for a long time.
I know currently, I know you're involved in all sorts of issues since Occupy. I know I saw you at the Climate Change March. I've seen you at all sorts of events. The Black Friday event at Walmart.
Right.
Would you want to talk just a little bit about that? What's that all about for people that might not know?
Well, I think we all know that when we go to work, the boss usually sets a wage and tells you what your expectations are supposed to be when you go to work. And if there's no union contract, the boss basically has a personnel manual, and that are basically is the conditions of your employment. But to go a step further, it's usually at will, which means if he decides to change it, he can change that or anytime. So a lot, what you're seeing in the service economy, because a lot of the factory jobs that I had been shipped out because of the free trade agreement, you're seeing the wage scale fall, and people get paid, less and less. So, to me, we mystify economics in this country because of our culture. I think we have sort of a Wild West approach, and we want to believe in the government, and we want to believe in the banking system, and Occupy started questioning that. But I still don't think people understand the economics. That's why I have this book here by Robert Hilbronner and Lester Thoreau called Economics Explained. And they include Keynes, they include Marx, they include the major economic leaders who sort of Adam Smith identified what the economic relationships are. And in Monthly Review, which is an independent socialist new magazine, people can also find more in-depth discussions about the economy and what happened in 2008 and what's going on with land and the ecology from economics. Economics is so mystified, though, and it's really, I can tell you in a small graphic illustration what it's all about.
Okay.
We have a minimum wage in this country. There are people who say we should have no minimum wage, right? What the minimum wage does is it sets the price of labor. Labor is a supply. There's a demand for labor, okay? There's a supply curve, like how many Cracker Jacks can you sell, and there's a price where you'll sell them all, okay? Same thing with labor. Without a minimum wage, employers will probably want there to be a lot of unemployment because they can pay you just about anything.
Right, just about nothing.
With a minimum wage, they at least have to pay you that amount, but it never changes fast enough. Now, if you have a living wage, and oftentimes the only way you get that is through a union contract, you negotiate, so your wage goes up to there. That's your point of balance in the middle. That's probably the most basic law of economics that you need to know, whether you're talking about commodities or labor. If you just think about that, then it's pretty obvious what you need. You need to fight for better minimum wages that are living wages. And you need, if you have the opportunity, to organize yourselves together to take advantage of laws that enable you to talk to your employer about how to budget you in. Just like at home, you talk about your budget and how you're going to budget the college in for your kids or whatever. If you don't have that discussion at the table, you don't find out about scholarships, you don't find out about loans, you don't find out about summer jobs that your kids have to go to so that they raise some of the money too. Too often in this country we don't have that conversation because we think that the price is always set.
Right, we don't have any input.
Now, if you go buy a car, there is a negotiation, right? Or there should be. There are certain cultural places where we still negotiate. One of those is when you have a union contract, when you buy a car. maybe at a farmer's market or at a sale. Now, one of the parts of our Constitution say that we have a right to amass wealth through hard work and thrift. Okay, but what they don't tell you is you can work hard and still not amass wealth even though you're thrifty. Because if the economy has high unemployment and the employers don't want to pay a living wage, they can basically ruin your life unless you do something about it. And that, I think, is the responsibility of every citizen, to make that Constitution work and to realize that the people who set the wages or set the cost are not always fair people. Okay, I think the question has to be asked is, who sets your wage and how do they come about doing it? Do they set your wage so they can maximize profit, and do they make sure that there's quite a bit of unemployment so they can pay you less? If these are the people setting the wages, then that's wrong. Our elected officials need to do something about it, which would call for living wages, jobs programs to eliminate unemployment, and give people that ability to exercise their economic rights. So that's what the Walmart thing is about, is to show people that as consumers, we need to care about the people who are helping us make these transactions, and that the transactions that are most important are those transactions of sympathy and solidarity that we have when we make a public display about caring for what somebody is not making, even though they're working really hard, and the sadness and the tragedy and the despair that can bring into somebody's life that could actually be a happy life if they were being treated fairly. So that's why we go out there. And believe me, I don't like to go out on Black Friday, because usually I got relatives over, and not all my relatives understand why I do these things, because they're just like me, regular people, and maybe they haven't gotten bitten by the bug to go out there and network and do something about it. But every time I've networked and done something about it, not only have I felt good about it and felt good about myself, I've met good people and actually found ways to network with them and sometimes transact business and benefit from it. So getting out there and doing something has many facets. It's a good thing.
It is a good thing. We're down to less than 10 minutes.
Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the organizations that I think were one of the founding members of, and that's the Solidarity Committee, which has been in the Capital Region over 30 years. Could you talk a little bit about some of the work you do with the Solidarity Committee?
Yes, we started 30-some years ago. We were brought out to different picket lines to support workers who were on the line. First, there were the PATCO workers. There was a strike after they supported Reagan in the national election. A lot of their issues were health and safety, because it's a very stressful job, a lot of heart attacks, people under a lot of stress, and they were betrayed by Reagan, and he changed the social contract. The social contract said that if you went out on strike, we would not allow, and employers would not replace you with strike breakers. And that was the first time they broke that social covenant, which was a real blow to the middle class, because once you risk your job going out on strike, not just a period of time when you weren't working and maybe were without benefits, you usually got your job back. And then we saw Greyhound, the national carrier, force its drivers out on strike through concession bargaining, and we had huge mass picket lines down at the Greyhound station in Albany, and basically stopped production. That means we stopped the buses, and that was unusual because there was so much community support. So we thought, we had seen a lot of each other on all these picket lines, that we should establish an ongoing activist committee. Many of us felt the unions weren't communicating enough with one another on the grassroots level, and that this committee could work within the labor movement and take the best strategies and tactics and examples of solidarity and grow that movement and incorporate these tactics into generalized union strategy. And I think in many ways we succeeded. We also created a monthly zine which goes out to over 1,000 people, a hard copy, and is also posted on our Facebook site every month, where we get worker activists to write articles on agriculture, on economics, on peace, on living wages, and you also use it as a vehicle to organize events. We have events going on throughout the year. We have a Labor Day celebration. We have a Martin Luther King Day celebration. We missed last year. We're going to bring it back again. We have a May 1st Workers' Day celebration and other things to fill in the middle. And having the newspaper is very important because it sort of plugs us all in together. And the committee meets monthly, every second Thursday of the month, right now at the Social Justice Center at 7 o'clock. And anybody can come, and everybody who comes has a vote.
Well, I hope some of our viewers will join you.
They're welcome. We love to see them.
We're down to less than 5 minutes here. I wondered if you could just take a couple of minutes to talk about some of your best memories of actions. I know I've seen a photo of you marching with Cesar Chavez back in 1986.
Yes.
And maybe you could just talk about that, and if there's another event maybe that you remember.
Yeah, well, that was very interesting. I had just been working for the Service Employees International Union for a couple of years, and I was fortunate enough to be a delegate and go to the national convention that was held in Toronto, because SEIU has members in Canada and the United States, so it's truly an international, at least from that respect. And we were at the convention, and we saw that the Bell telephone workers were out on strike. And there had been a big international conference there that they had actually sort of been ushers for. They had these special coats on to bring in these big money people from around the world to decide our fates. So many of them had these coats on, and they were marching, and we went to their picket line, and we found out one thing: because they had national health care, they didn't have to worry that if they stayed out for 30 days that they would lose their health benefits. So that to me was just sort of a mind blower, just going from one side of the border to another and seeing how the health care was much more secure in Canada than in our country, which is employee-based health care. So we went back to the convention, we revved everybody up, and Cesar Chavez saw a bunch of us leaving to go to the picket line, and he brought his contingent, because he had just spoken to the convention, along with us, and we went and we marched, and I got to have a picture marching with Cesar Chavez. The guy behind him is a big muscly guy from the Seafarers Union. They used to do bodyguard for Cesar, and one of my buddies, probably Doug Bullock, took the picture. But that was quite a moment. It sort of showed me that he agreed that we needed to do more grassroots support in the labor movement for working people. So that was a moment, yeah.
Do you have any other ideas of what people who are listening here today, who have heard what you've said, how they can get more involved? What would you suggest people do?
I would suggest that they look around them and see what they're interested in first, because I don't think you're going to be good being an activist if you're not interested in it. So you have to figure out your issue. If you have an organization that's connected to that issue, like your union, go to the meeting, ask questions, make sure you have your union contract, have some input into it, and maybe consider being a representative. In the community, we have many, many groups. Social Justice Center houses many of them. You can go there and find out who's at there. We got your group, the Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, the Solidarity Committee. Network. Find out what your passion is, how it connects to your life, and take a hour to a week to plug in.
Get involved. Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Fred. This has been such a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks, Trudy.
I hope you'll come back. And thank you all
Sure.
for joining us. Please join us for future shows where we'll be talking about single-payer health care, which they have in Canada, and we'll also be talking more about the effect of the continuous wars have had on our local and national economy. Thank you.
Kettles of Baghdad back to our